The Game Boy Advance was an impressive piece of tech for the time, and even now, 20 years later, it's still remembered quite fondly. It made a number of improvements over the original Game Boy and the Game Boy Color in terms of sheer power and specs, and even after some time, the Game Boy Advance would improve upon itself with the GBA SP. It was a powerful, sleek, and comfortable system with a massive library of over 1,000 games to play. Now, you'd think that Nintendo would milk the GBA for all that it's worth, but the GBA had a shockingly short lifespan. The Game Boy Advance launched in 2001, but Nintendo would go ahead and announce and release its successor in 2004. Now, sure, there were still games coming out on the Game Boy Advance after its launch of the successor, but these were few and far between, and they didn't always sell that great. The DS was revealed at Nintendo's E3 2004 presentation, and it was honestly pretty impressive. It was showing off a brand new Metroid Prime title and even a fully fledged remake of Super Mario 64. It had a lot of people, at the very least, curious about it, and most people were correct in assuming that this would be the successor to the Game Boy Advance, but Nintendo, in a bizarre attempt of damage control, stated that the DS was to act more of a pillar to support the Game Boy Advance and the GameCube. But then next year, in E3 2005, they would show off the GameCube successor, the Revolution, or, as we know now, the Wii. So, yeah, so much for that pillar statement. Most people didn't have faith that the DS would do well at all. Sony was getting ready to jump into the handheld market with their surprisingly powerful PSP, but, honestly, we all know what happened. The DS dominated the handheld market. It released in 2004 and received support up till 2012. Between the different models and redesigns, the DS sold roughly 154 million units, making it the second most successful video game console of all time, right behind Sony's own PlayStation 2. Now, granted, when the DS costs around $150 and the PSP launched at the same price as the Nintendo Wii, the PSP really didn't stand a chance despite it being a great system in its own right.
I'm playing Nut, but there's portable Nut. What?
Part of the reason for the success of the new Nintendo handheld were the multiple revisions that the DS received. At launch, we'd get what's known as the FAT model, and it takes a number of cues from the GBA SP. Now, first things first, the Nintendo DS is fully compatible with GBA games, which is great. It makes transitioning from GBA to the DS much more comfortable. It does sting a little that the Game Boy and Game Boy Color games are not playable here, but I personally never got much mileage from the original Game Boy, so I didn't mind it at all. What also helps is that this model reuses the GBA SP's charger, so again, it makes transitioning from one console to the other much more convenient. You want to know a little secret? You get a DS flash cart and a GBA flash cart. You put the two inside the DS, and you got thousands of games to play right off the bat. You'll never run out of games ever again. And don't come at me with the whole, pirating games is bad and you should feel bad. Like, no, don't even start. If Nintendo doesn't want me pirating their games, then they need to start making their older games more accessible. It'd be great to have Game Boy Advance games and DS games or GameCube games or Nintendo 64 games on the Nintendo Switch, and I would totally spend money to make that happen, but hey, Nintendo disagrees, so I'll sail the 7 seas. Besides adopting the GBA's game library and its rechargeable battery, it also has a clamp design that makes it easier to fit inside your pocket. Closing the DS while the power is still on will put the console into a sleep mode, which saves battery life, and hey, look at that! The DS has a headphone jack. Nice. These screens aren't too shabby either. Like, they're not as good as the GBA SP AGS 101. Christ, say that 3 times fast. But it is better than the original GBA screen. But if you wanted a screen that's more comparable to the AGS 101, then that's what the DS Lite is for. A sleeker and slimmer version of the Nintendo DS with a front-lit screen, and for some reason likes to make the GBA cartridges stick out in the bottom, which is kind of weird and uncomfortable, but hey, these screens are pretty good, so I'm okay with it. This one also needs its own charger, which is kind of lame, and personally, I just prefer this chunky boy right here. Like, I don't know, it feels more durable. I like its thickness. It feels like as if it's made for me and my big manly hands. Nintendo released even more revisions of the DS with the DSi and the DSi XL, featuring a camera, a digital shop, and a new user interface, but it nicked the GBA support, so I never bothered with it. The DS had a number of features that the developers made good use of, things like a system clock that changed the time of day in-game. You also had a microphone, and some games even had puzzles that you would solve by closing the console. They definitely were creative when making games for this thing, and you can even argue that in some cases it was to the game's detriment, which is fair, and don't worry, we'll get to those examples later on in the video. But with all of that being said, there were 2 features that made the Nintendo DS so important. It was being able to connect to the internet via Wi-Fi and the 2 screens. While it's not the first Nintendo console that would let you connect to the internet, it was the first console that had you connected to the internet wirelessly. Metroid Prime Hunters, Mario Kart DS, and the Pokemon games were huge because of this. Like, Metroid Prime Hunters essentially acted as the DS's answer to Halo, which is kind of funny seeing how there was an actual pitch to put Halo on the Nintendo DS, but it just fell through for one reason or another. Like, if that actually went through, that would have been really, really interesting. The two screens is both a blessing and a curse in my opinion. It does a great job of showing off the massive scale of some of these games, and a lot of developers put the screens to good use, but oh my god, like trying to capture footage for some of these games can be a real pain in the ass, you know? Like oh, should I have the screens like laid out like this, or maybe this looks better? Oh wait, no, that's right. Like some of the games have to play with the DS on its side, so I gotta fix that too. God, it's so annoying. Like it's not the fault of the DS by any means, but like just like in 2021 and you're trying to capture footage or do streams or whatever, it's like, what am I supposed to do? So yeah, I apologize for some of the inconsistencies that you're going to see in the video. I'm sorry. The bottom screen is the touch screen, and this was used in a variety of ways. Like some of the basic ways were menu navigation, or using the touch screen to move your character around or to interact with things in the environment. You can also tap the screen to the rhythm of music, or walking a dog, or spinning a trackball to move the character around. It's not as bad as you might think. One thing that a lot of people grew to dislike, however, was the overuse of the touchscreen. A lot of developers felt the need to add touch features because, hey, it's on the DS, so we have to have touch controls. And really, I think the problem isn't the touch controls themselves, but it's the lack of options. The DS Zelda games got a lot of flack for not being able to control Link while using the D-pad, and we all know that it could have worked too. There were games like Golden Sun Dark Dawn that made touch controls an option, and there's even a ROM patch for the DS Zelda games that make the game's control more traditionally. Now, I do have a couple of gripes with the console itself. Now, first of all, while the screen isn't the worst thing in the world, the DS came out after the GBA SP AGS 101. Again, try saying that 5 times fast. There really isn't a good excuse for the original DS model to have a screen that's this dim. And sure, you could say something about the DS Lite, how that was a thing, but the original model should have had a better screen than what we currently have. The original model should have been the DS Lite. Second would be the lack of any kind of analog stick or circle pad or something. The PSP had the right idea of having this nub thing. You know, it's a bit uncomfortable, but it is better than having nothing at all. The DS had a number of games that took place in 3D environments, and while the majority of the ones that I played didn't really need an analog stick, seeing how they were RPGs, something like the Mario 64 remake could have definitely used it. See, when I first played the remake, it was on the 3DS with the circle pad, and while it doesn't exactly fix the controls per se, it does make them feel a little bit better. It's kind of like a placebo in that sense. Now, I don't think the controls on the DS are bad, however, they are kind of awkward and they do take some getting used to. But with all that being said, like, there's still some of that disgusting Mario 64 stank that crept its way into this remake, like not being able to turn around reliably, because hey, we have this game that's praised to high heaven for having great controls, yet we can't even turn around reliably in the original game. And I'm crazy when I say like Sonic Adventure. I'm crazy when I say that. At least that game could turn around. But anyways, having something like a run button, for example, like that for me feels a lot better to control than having the garbage analog stick found on the N64 controller. The level design in Mario 64 DS still isn't exactly my thing. Again, like this is a game for me where the further along the game that I go into, the worse that the level design gets. But thankfully, the different characters they could play as, like Yoshi or Luigi, makes getting through some of the crummier levels feel a bit better thanks to their more forgiving jumps. There's more stars added, there's new minigames, there's new characters, new power-ups. Like, this is the version of Mario 64 that I'm okay with. I still don't think it's a great game, but when you compare it to the original, I mean, shit, it's a no-brainer. It's a DS version all the way. But then again, I'd rather play most games than the original Mario 64. It stinks, and I don't like it. Now back to the lack of any true analog stick, the DS also had its fair share of first-person shooters, and weirdly enough, Call of Duty had a shockingly large amount of support for the Nintendo DS, but most of these games looked and played like ass, so you'd be forgiven if you skipped these. Weirdly enough, these were made by the guys who made Geist on the GameCube. Anyone else remember that one? The game was weird, wasn't it? There's also Metroid Prime Hunters that I mentioned before, and while it is impressive to have a new Metroid Prime title on the DS, and honestly it does make sense to have one on here, they really should have thought about whether or not they should, rather than if they could. I mean, the game's not bad or anything, but these controls are going to cramp up your hand in no time. Being able to use the stylus to aim your arm cannon makes sense, and it is technically more accurate than using dual analog, but it doesn't exactly feel as good as using dual analog. There's a number of different control options they can choose from, but using the D-pad to move around and using the stylus to aim is the default setting, and honestly it's a setting that most FPS developers use when making games for the DS, namely Renegade Kid with the likes of Moon and Dementium the Ward. Now, neither of these games are my personal favorites, but they are impressive for running buttery smooth, and, you know, for a game that takes place on the moon, it's got a strong sense of atmosphere, huh? Get it? I guess you could say my sense of humor is out of this world! I'm not gonna stop making puns. It's not a phase, so get over it. Why doesn't anyone watch my content? Thankfully, despite a handful of games, most of what you'll play here won't really need an analog stick. It would have been preferred, but it's not absolutely necessary. Now, if you're looking for games in the 2D platformer market, then you're going to be in luck because the DS had some really good ones. Fans of the Game Boy Advance were let down by the fact that there wasn't any new 2D Mario game, but behold, the DS had the first 2D Mario game since like 1992 or something, and it's new Super Mario Bros, and it's a solid game all around. Now granted, even though Nintendo milked this series to the ground and constantly reused assets from the series to other spin-off games and a whole bunch of other junk that I don't give a shit about, it shouldn't take away from the fact that New Super Mario Bros. Is a damn good game and it's worth your time. With this game in particular, I really don't mind the whole nostalgia pandering because it actually kind of makes sense for this game to be a bit of, I guess, retro bait, seeing how this was the first 2D Mario game in years. But even still, it had plenty of tricks up its sleeve with the new power-ups, like the mini mushroom and the blue shell. The blue shell being like one of my favorite power-ups in the entire series, I might add. The Mega Mushroom was the one that they promoted the most, and it's been a staple of the series ever since. Now, one of the biggest things that they did was implementing some of Mario's moves in the 3D games, so now he could triple jump and wall jump, which allows developers to get a bit more creative with the level design. Now, I know that most of you guys know me as the Mario-hating cucklord, but guys, I don't hate Mario, because like, if a game is good, then I'll play it. I just hate the poopy ones. And it just so happens that Mario has a lot of poopy games, so, you know, eat it. Now, some of my favorite games in the DS are the 3 Sonic Rush-like games that came out. Now, I know in the case of Sonic Rush and Rush Adventure, they got a lot of criticism for cheap, pit-heavy level design, and people aren't in the wrong for criticizing that. Sonic Rush, honestly, for me, is kind of like the Sprite that you get from McDonald's. It just hits different, you know? Like, maybe it's the music mixed with Sonic and new character Blaze doing cool stunts as they bolt across the stage and do stunts midair. It just feels good to play. Rush Adventure has really cool level themes and bosses from what I played so far. Like, I can't believe I actually slept on this game for so long because it's actually a lot of fun. But getting to new stages can be a bit of a chore because you have to replay levels to get materials to build higher quality boats to explore new islands. And if you don't have what you need, you have to go back to the other stages and grind. And I kind of understand why they did that because the whole point of Sonic is to go back to the previous stages and get better at them. But to force the player to backtrack and grind like that, that can get pretty old after a while. And apparently finding the Chaos Emeralds in this game is some of the worst Chaos Emerald hunts that you can get in the Sonic series, but I wouldn't know because I haven't bothered to do that yet, and from what I heard, I don't think I want to do that. Weirdly enough, Sonic Colors is the best game out of these 3 games. You have the abilities from the 3D Sonic games like the homing attack, the stomp, and the slide. You have airtight level design with the new power-ups in the forms of the 2 new wisps. You get to see what characters like Silver, Shadow, Cream, and Omega are up to. There's more collectibles and a really cool final boss where you get to play Super Sonic. Like, this is a game that delivers. Now, I'll be the odd one out and say that I actually like this game more than the Wii game. I mean, this video is full of hot takes, isn't it? So this is a little random, but it's kind of like popped in my head. Like, it's weird to think that third-party support was crazy good on the DS, but a lot of people were actually really mixed on the first-party support. Again, like, people weren't exactly hot on Super Mario 64 DS or on Metroid Prime Hunters. Like, people found that game to be kind of boring. I mean, we even got a Star Fox game that no one ever seems to talk about, and this even kind of applies with the 2 Zelda games that were released, Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. Both of these games were designed and structured in a similar way, to where you have one point where you'd be returning to time and time again to unlock the next part of the world map, and you mix the formulaic structure with the forced touch controls and other weird gimmicks like using the microphone to blow dust off a map or to play a flute. And it's easy to understand why these games might not sit well for a lot of people. In the case of Phantom Hourglass, I actually understand it. Now, first of all, this game is a sequel to The Wind Waker, and it uses the same exact art style and some of the same characters. So if you like The Wind Waker, then you're getting more of The Wind Waker. But for me, it kind of felt very been there, done that. Also, the Palace of the Ocean King is kind of what kills the game for me. You have to sneak around these phantoms that can take you out in one hit, you're on a strict time limit, and you have to do a whole lot of waiting. If it was just the one time they had to go through this palace, then maybe I could look past it, but you're going to be backtracking here every single time that you clear a dungeon, and you have to go through parts of the dungeon that you've already been through. It gets repetitive real quick. So yeah, I wasn't exactly big on Phantom Hourglass as an adult and even as a kid. But I'm not gonna lie, like, I do think that there's a lot of charm here and there is fun to be had. Being able to customize your bows is actually a lot of fun. You can make some crazy stuff with it, and the multiplayer is something that I would religiously play with my friends back when I was in middle school. It's not a bad game per se, it's just a very, very flawed one, and for my money, it's probably my least favorite Zelda game, period. I don't know, I mean, maybe Zelda 2's worse. Oh yeah, Zelda 2 is definitely worse. What am I talking about? Now, if we're talking about The Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks, now, hold on to your butts, kids, because here's another take for you. This game right here, The Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks, is, bar none, my favorite game on the DS. It's one of my favorite Zelda games of all time. Now sure, the story's kind of been there, done that, but our companion character is none other than Princess Zelda herself. And she's not gonna be like Princess Peach, who just sits around and waits for some dork to come save her. Nah. She's better than that. Zelda gets her soul ripped from her body, and yet she's still gonna go out with Link to help him on his quest to get her body back. This incarnation of Zelda has so much charm and character and wit to her. Whenever she's on screen, I said this about Midna before, but she absolutely steals the show. I know a lot of people say that Midna is the best companion, and I do understand why, but for my money's worth, I'll take Zelda any day of the week. She's the best Zelda companion. You can't tell me otherwise. As a ghost, she can possess the phantoms of the Tower spirits, and she can actually help you solve puzzles and to climb to higher floors of the tower. This is a big thing for me. It's why I like this game over Phantom Hourglass. The Tower spirits is this game's version of the Ocean King's Palace, but unlike Phantom Hourglass, when you return here, you don't have to redo section. Every floor has its own unique challenges, so there's always something new to look forward to. Spirit Tracks has really good dungeon design, a charming cast of characters, and some of the best music that you'd hear in a Zelda game. Oh wait, no, I forgot. This game sucks because it has trains or something. Because, you know, train is bad, I do not like it, it's bad, and why is Link on a train is dumb and bad. And of course, a lot of the success of the DS came from none other than the Pokemon franchise. Now, if you were a fan during this time, then you were eating like a god. You have the likes of the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games, you have Pokemon Conquest, you have the Pokemon Ranger games. Like, there was so much to enjoy here. Now, I never really dabbled too much into the spin-offs, though there were a few games that caught my interest, but I just never got around to playing them. I mostly just stayed with the core Pokemon games, and believe it or not, for a while, I actually wasn't too big about these games. Starting off, I was never really that impressed with Gen 4, Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. Pokemon Platinum being the game of this generation that I played. Like, I wasn't a fan of the Sinnoh region, I wasn't a fan of most of the new mons that were introduced, and really the game visually just wasn't that impressive to me. Like, yeah, it had some 3D models for the buildings and stuff, but most of the environments and the animations looked like a slightly enhanced GBA game, and honestly, that's just a real shame. Also, like, this game is slow as hell. Like, there just wasn't a whole lot for me to get attached to. See, this was around the time where I started to, I guess, grow out of Pokemon, admittedly. Like, I don't think that the Gen 4 games are bad, but this was the point where I realized that these games can feel very samey after a while. And when they do feel this way, they kind of end up being, I guess, mediocre. Like, I know that's going to piss off a lot of people because I know that this generation has their fans. And again, I don't think this game is a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. And even despite all that I've said, I still have a soft spot for this game. This game introduced Lucario, and believe it or not, Lucario was one of my favorite Pokemon even before Smash Bros. See, my sister actually got a Riolu egg from some guy online, and she gave it to me super early on in the game. So I decided that I was going to hatch this egg from the beginning of the game and race it to be all the way to level 100. So I was going to take it from the beginning of the game, go all the way to the championship, level 100, you know? And here he is. He's on my TV. I love it. If I thought that this game was bad or not enjoyable to any extent, like how I feel with Pokemon Sun and Pokemon Ultra Sun, then I would not be able to do it. I would not be able to go through this game. It was this indifference that I had towards the Pokemon series at the time that had me miss out on the Gold and Silver remakes, and what do you know? They just so happen to be some of the highest rated games in the franchise's history. I haven't beaten them yet, so I'm not 100% sure how I feel about them, but from what I played so far with my good friend, Jeb at JebTube, they're actually really cool. But, you know, now that I'm actually thinking about it, I really do want to get back into streaming that game because it was a lot of fun. It's hard to find time, you know, to stream with other people, so there's that. Believe it or not, I would eventually come back to the Pokemon series and end up being a fan again thanks to the likes of Pokemon Black and White. Part 2. Yeah, I didn't even play the original Gen 5 games. I played the sequels first. Like, yeah, that's not confusing at all, right? But yeah, dude, I love these games. The Unova region is one of my favorite regions so far, with its massive cities and seemingly endless ways to distract yourself. The gyms are some of the coolest gyms of the series. Like, there's this one that's pretty early on. It's like an underground rock concert, or this one that's like a giant catwalk for a fashion show, and like, the further along you get in the catwalk, the music adapts for how far that you make it towards the end. Like, that is so fucking cool, and the music is absolutely banging! Now, I can't comment on the quality of the original Pokemon Black and White, but man, like, these games right here feel like as if they were really giving it their all. I remember doing a lot of post-game stuff in this game too. Like, this was the game where I did a lot of legendary hunting, and even the whole side quest involving Yancey. Like, I thought that was actually really cute. And the pacing of this game is night and day compared to Pokemon Platinum. Like, Gen 4 is so slow, but here in Gen 5, the battles are a lot snappier and pack way more of a punch. And these sprites are animated really well, and they look so crisp and clean. Like, this is what I expected from the next generation of Pokemon. This is easily one of my personal favorite games in the series, and one of my personal favorite games on the system, hands down. I love this game. So, for the longtime viewers of this channel, I got a question for you. So, knowing the kind of games that I like playing, and knowing the kind of games that I've covered so far on the channel, did you guys expect me to ever gush about a Tetris game? Because if not, then ready your butts, because Tetris DS is actually weirdly, strangely good. Now, you'd think that people would like this game because it's Tetris with the code of Nintendo paint slapped over it, you know, the whole, oh my god, it's Mario! Oh, Tetris! Oh! Christ. You'd think that'd be why, but you'd actually be wrong, believe it or not. What makes this game so special for a lot of people are the different ways how you actually play Tetris. Like, you got your standard mode, you got a mission mode, but then you have this one mode that's like this Metroid themed game where you have to catch these falling blocks to form a Tetris that way. You know, this one right here has actually been my favorite mode in this game. Like, I was just going to capture just, you know, a few seconds of footage, maybe like a minute or a minute and a half, but I just kept going and going and going and going. Like, it's so fun. So you have the different ways of playing Tetris. You got the Nintendo code of paint. You got remixes of Nintendo themes. You know, like it's fun. Like, it's a personal favorite. Like, it's not art or anything. It's just a fun, dumb game. It's fucking Tetris. What do you expect? There's also something like Rhythm Heaven, for example. Like, this is actually the first game in the series that we got here in the West, seeing how the first game on the Game Boy Advance never left Japan. But yeah, this game's actually really great. It's a rhythm game where all you do is tap or slide the stylus across the screen. It's a simple concept, but they put it to really good use here. Like, the music is really catchy and there's a lot of charm here, and the game can actually be really hard at first. But I love how this game is always encouraging you to be better. Like, there's something about this game and the kind of tone that it has that's very comforting. This is something that, from what I've seen anyways, is consistent with the series. It's all about having fun, no more and no less. And I have a lot of respect for this game, seeing how it wears that on its sleeve. This really needs to come back on the Switch or something like that. Like, we are past due for a Rhythm Heaven game. Hotel Dusk Room 215 is another game that I really love. It's a story-driven game with a gripping mystery and a beautiful art style. Now, Kyle Hyde isn't just the coolest trophy in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. He's a damaged ex-detective taking up odd jobs that leads into Hotel Dusk. He only stays for one day, and so much happens. Like, it's kind of nuts, honestly. Now, I usually don't care for spoilers, but this is a game that I think more people need to play to experience the story itself. And not because I think the story is godlike or anything, but more so with mysteries like the one in this game, it's best to go in blind. If you're a fan of the Professor Layton games or the Ace Attorney games, then something like this might be right up your alley. Oh man, but then you got something like Animal Crossing Wild World. Like, I knew so many people who jumped into the series with the GameCube game, but this was the entry that got me hooked on Animal Crossing. I have so many memories of playing this game back when I was in middle school. Like, that was actually a really bad time for me that messed up my mental health something fierce. This was the game that I needed. All you do, you kick back, you make some friends, you catch some fish, you make some money, you decorate your house. Like, this was escapism at its finest. Like, I remember freaking out when I found out that they had items from the Zelda series for sale. Like, I was shopping at Red's place and I saw that he was selling the Triforce of all things for like 10,000 bells. I spent the entire day catching and selling fish. I shook fruit from the trees. I got all the money from the money rock. I kept working my ass off all day until I was able to afford that thing. And let me tell you, that was one of the most satisfying feelings I had ever had. Man, something else I remember too, like Bones and Ruby were like two of the earliest villagers that I had in the game, and I grew really attached to them. I mean, like, both of them were like so much nicer to me than most kids were when I was in middle school. So these two characters to me were like my closest friends at the time, which I know that sounds really fucking sad, but that just goes to show where I was in middle school. But then one day I boot up the game and I got a message from Bones saying that he moved away. And then a few days later, Ruby would do the same thing. And man, I was devastated. So much so that I dropped the game for a long time, and I wouldn't play it for like a really long time after that. Like, I maybe played it for like a few hours at one point, but I wouldn't get back into the series until New Leaf came out in the 3DS, and that's when I really got back into Animal Crossing. But nowadays, yeah, I'm doing just fine. You'd think that with how much New Horizons has to offer, that there really wouldn't be a reason to revisit Wild World, right? Well, kind of, maybe, because Wild World still has things that New Horizons should definitely bring back. First of all, and this was also in New Leaf, bring back the Nintendo-themed items. Like, y'all got a bunch of Mario stuff for Mario's 35th anniversary, so why can't we get other Nintendo items too? Like, I got the perfect spot for a Master Sword on my island, but y'all gotta put that shit in the game, come on! Wild World also had these flea markets. Like, on certain days of the month, you can go inside someone's house and offer to buy their stuff, and they can also come to your place and buy your stuff too. But yeah, revisiting this game was actually really nice, you know, especially with how by some weird stretch of luck, I managed to get Ruby in this new game. Like, what the fuck? That's crazy. So after being pleasantly surprised with the likes of Wild World and seeing how that game held up, I decided to revisit Nintendogs. You know, that was another game that I really liked a lot as a kid, and it was one of the first games that I had on the DS, and admittedly, it didn't hold my attention for very long. You get a dog, you take the dog on a walk, you feed the dog, you bathe the dog. That's really all that you do. Like, sure, you could train your dogs to get better performances in the different types of contests, but aside from that, there's not really much else to do. Like, there definitely was an appeal here for the time, don't get me wrong, but I think the novelty of Nintendogs has worn out its welcome a long time ago. Honestly, it's kind of sad to look back on the DS and you realize that this was actually the deathbed for a number of Nintendo IPs. Star Fox was actually on this deathbed for quite a while with Star Fox Command. Like, a lot of people thought that this was the last Star Fox game, and then we'd eventually get Star Fox Zero in 2015, and yeah, that was a game, I guess. Advance Wars was in a very similar situation. Advance Wars actually had 2 games on here, with the last one releasing in 2008, and for the longest time, it seemed like as if this franchise was dead, but thankfully, Nintendo's bringing this game back with the remakes of Advance Wars 1 and 2 on the Nintendo Switch, and I think that's actually really cool, and I would love to see more of that kind of stuff. But for something like Custom Robo, yeah, that's it, you know? Like, folks in Japan had a total of 5 games in the series, spanning from the Nintendo 64 all the way up to the Nintendo DS, but we in the West only had 2 games. We had one at the GameCube, and the other being Custom Robo Arena on the DS. Weirdly enough, like, this game in particular had a lot of attention brought to it. Like, the main Robo of this game, Ray Mark III, was actually an assist trophy in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, and they even made a Mii costume out of it in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Like, that is actually really freaking cool. But I'm guessing that this game never really sold that well, which is why we haven't seen anything from the Custom Robo series ever since. And it's a shame too, because I've always loved the idea of Custom Robo. Like, you build your own robot with a variety of parts and weapons, and you duke it out in the 3D arena. Like, it's a lot of fun. I really do think that something like this has a market in this day and age. Like, this is definitely a franchise that Nintendo needs to revisit someday. Chibi Robo is another one of these franchises that kind of died with the DS, and you might be thinking, well, hey, there were 2 other Chibi Robo games on the 3DS, and you're not wrong, but you're also not exactly correct in that statement either. So let me explain. You know, we in the West got Chibi Robo Park Patrol, but the only way you could buy this game is if you went to Walmart to get it. No other retailer sold this game because Nintendo of America had this bright idea to make it a Walmart exclusive. You know, they actually tried this done again with Xenoblade Chronicles. Like, when that game was brought over to the West, Nintendo of America made it a GameStop exclusive, but you know, that's a different story for a different time. So yeah, we got this new Chibi Robo game that came out. It didn't sell very well, but Skip, the developer of the Chibi Robo games, were able to make another game of the franchise that took place after the first game on the GameCube, but it only released in Japan due to the poor sales in North America. Of course, we would still get games from the Chibi Robo franchise on the 3DS. Both of these games weren't exactly what I call good games, but this Japanese exclusive game was the last game to play anything like the one of the GameCube, and that's a damn shame that we were never able to legally experience it. I want to talk a bit more about the kind of games that we in the West never got, but since we're on the topic of little Chibo over here, this kind of makes me a little happy. You know, not the fact that it wasn't ever brought over, but the fact that I actually get to play it, you know? Like, this actually makes me really happy because I love the GameCube Chibi Robo game. So to play another game that has that same kind of spirit, it felt really nice. Like, I'm not sure if these kind of games will be for everybody because they are very strange games, but they have heart and charm and spades. This game in particular is pretty interesting. You arrive in a poor family's home consisting of Jenny, you know, the frog girl from the first game. Like, that's wow. I mean, she's grown up and oh my gosh, she fell on hard times. Like, she's a single mom with a child and a dog and like almost no money. So you gotta do what a Chibi Robo's gotta do. You gotta do what you can to make the family happy. You can find money to put in the piggy bank. You can actually use that money that you save up to buy nice things like a TV or other novelties. You know, just things to make the family a bit more comfortable. And like in the original game, you could clean and explore the house, and the goal is the same in that one. You have to do what you can to become the very best Chibi Robo out there. Everything you do, however, requires energy, so you have to recharge yourself by plugging yourself into these little electrical outlets. However, by doing so, you're also taking away precious electricity that the family needs to keep the lights on. So yeah, things are pretty rough this time around. So you have to find that perfect balance between being productive, but also being conservative with your energy consumption. Like, this is actually a really cool game. I kind of love this one, not gonna lie. But you guys know what the big one is for me. Like, this is the last time that we see a new Golden Sun game, and I mean, at this point, it's already been almost 11 years. I mean, I guess kind of in hindsight, because, you know, Dark Dawn was actually the first game of the Golden Sun series that I would play. You know, there's a lot that I have to say about this game that's best saved for a proper video, and I will get around to doing this game eventually, but for now, I do want to say that despite me feeling that this is the weakest entry in the series, I still like this game quite a bit. Like, as someone who's now more seasoned with the Golden Sun games, I can look at the things that this game tries to do, and I can have a lot of appreciation towards this game. Like, it still has most of the problems that plagued the previous entries, but it also has just about everything that makes those games great too. You got the Jin and the customizable class system, you got the fast-paced combat, you got the clever dungeons that has you interacting with your surroundings. The elements that make a good Golden Sun game are here and accounted for. I know some of the more die-hard, extreme Golden Sun fans try to pretend that this game doesn't exist, and I can't exactly blame them. I mean, honestly, like, you know, this is just the wrong game at the wrong time. And I know I said this before, but Camelot really should have just held off on the DS and put the game on the 3DS instead. I mean, even still, like, the late 2000s and the early 2010s, they weren't exactly the most ideal time for JRPGs, but at the end of the day, you know, this game didn't even crack 1 million units sold on one of the most successful consoles of all time. And because of this, Nintendo locked Golden Sun away behind the vault, and it's been almost 11 years since that we've heard from this franchise. Now, I mean, sure, we've got re-released games on the Wii U's Virtual Console. We got Golden Sun The Last Stage on there, and we also have Isaac as an assist trophy and a Mii costume in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. So we know that Nintendo is, at the very least, aware of Golden Sun's existence. It helps that the demand for Golden Sun to return has been growing more and more over the years, and despite my thoughts from earlier this year when Mario Golf was announced, I kind of have this renewed faith that we can see the series come back in one way or another. I mean, like, if something like Advance Wars can come back, then I think something like Golden Sun can come back too. Like, the demand is definitely here, and JRPGs have been doing really, really well. So just get on it already. Like, I'm not going to stop talking about it until you bring it back. But yeah, you know, Golden Sun Dark Dawn. It's a pretty good game. They released late in the DS's lifespan, and it's not as good as Golden Sun or Golden Sun The Last Stage, but it's still a really good game on the DS, and I got a soft spot for it. I consider it a personal favorite. Don't at me. So yeah, the late 2000s wasn't exactly the greatest time for JRPGs, but shit, dude, like, that didn't stop the DS from pumping these things out like crazy, like to the mainstream, to the lesser known, to the downright obscure, to the brand new. The DS was home to so many types of games from the genre. Like, you never wonder what it would be like if you made The Wizard of Oz into a JRPG? Yeah, me neither, but it exists, and it's actually kind of good. What the fuck? I've already talked about the likes of Pokemon and Golden Sun, but there's this other game that I discovered very recently called Nostalgia. Essentially, what if you took Indiana Jones and Skies of Arcadia, you put them together, and you make an RPG out of it? Now, sure, the battles use a typical turn-based system, but the tone and the setting are refreshing for the genre. Like, look, there's even got airship battles, like in Skies of Arcadia. Like, I only discovered this game earlier this year, so I haven't gotten around to beating it yet. So, you know, maybe there's a point in the game where it dips really hard, but from the little bit that I've played so far, I kind of loved it, and I want to get back in there. Like, I was surprised by just a few moments that I put into the game, and it made such a big impression on me. Like, you know, I didn't play it for that long, and yet I'm still thinking about it. Like, it's a really good game so far. Oh man, now if we're talking about, like, personal nostalgia, like, we're gonna talk about Rune Factory. So, like, you know, we had a handful of Harvest Moon games on the DS, and they all sucked ass, but then we got Rune Factory over here picking up the slack. Rune Factory 3 is specifically the one that I enjoyed the most. Like, it feels the most polished and the most fluid, and I really do like these characters. Like, oh, you know, I'm just minding my own business, and this lady turns into a mermaid in the middle of the rain. Like, yeah, that's perfectly fine. The Rune Factory games are very similar to the likes of Harvest Moon and Stardew Valley, but have a bit more of a fantastical twist to them and with more in-depth action RPG mechanics. Like, these games are stupid good. You can bet your butt that I'm excited for Rune Factory 5 next year. So if we're talking about JRPGs, then we gotta talk about Square Enix, because Square Enix supported the DS like crazy. First of all, Final Fantasy went nuts on this thing. You had the 3D remakes of Final Fantasy 3 and 4. You remember those? Oh yeah, they were both brutally difficult and kicked my ass when I was a kid. You know, if I'm being honest, like, the 3D models aren't exactly the most appealing thing for me, you know, but the fact that they reanimated these scenes in Final Fantasy IV to make them more cinematic and to include surprisingly good voice acting I think it's very impressive. You could tell that a lot of love went into making this remake. I still prefer the GBA version of Final Fantasy IV over to the DS remake. Like, maybe it's shallow, but I think the GBA version is a lot easier on the eyes, and I also like how it doesn't feel the urge to flick me in the balls like the DS one does from time to time. But the team that remade Final Fantasy 3 and 4 would eventually go on to make their own game called Avalon Code. I haven't played it yet, but from what I've seen and heard, it looks like a pretty fun game. You also have a handful of entries in the Crystal Chronicle games, but then there was also something like Final Fantasy The Four Heroes of Light. This game, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I think this game is very easy on the eyes, and not a lot of people ever seem to talk about this game for some reason, especially seeing how this game essentially started the Bravely series. I'm not even making that up. It's a very traditional type of RPG, but I think that's kind of what they were going for. You know, again, it's kind of interesting to see how the Bravely series got its start, despite me not being the biggest fan of that series. I just think it's kind of weird how not a lot of people talk about that. Like, the Bravely series is still going on strong to this day, so you'd think that will draw more attention towards Four Heroes of Light, but maybe this game ended up being too old-fashioned for its own good. Like I said, I don't know, it's kind of weird because it's not like the game is bad, it's kind of okay, but then again, maybe that's just kind of the problem. It's just okay. Now, if we're talking about traditional JRPGs, you can't really get any more traditional than with the likes of Dragon Quest, and this is a series that got a lot of love on the DS. Dragon Quest 4, 5, and 6 are made available here, but also the newest entry in the series at the time, Dragon Quest 9, and that was an unintentional rhyme, but I'll stop wasting your time. This is a game that really wants you to play with other players, and the multiplayer was actually a huge appeal for this game. You know, being able to make your own character and to go on a grand adventure with your friends, you know, that seems like a really cool idea. But I don't have any friends who would play this with me, and also the online servers are dead, and even then, I don't know how the online would have worked in this game. But so, you know, playing it by myself, you know, it's a pretty good, pretty standard JRPG. It's pretty grind heavy, if I'm being honest. Like, if you want to keep up to date in terms of your armor, then you're going to be doing a lot of grinding, and trust me, it's not really smart to go into these dungeons unprepared. But if I'm being honest, this game still has a lot of the kind of charm and sense of adventure you can only find in Dragon Quest games. Plus, if you're playing this game by yourself, you can create characters for every member of your party, which is actually really cool. So again, for as grind heavy as this game can be, this one's actually a lot of fun. Let me get this out of the way. No, I haven't played The World Ends With You. I want to, I just never got around to playing it. But I did play this dumb title of a game. There's a lot of mixed opinions about this Kingdom Hearts game, but I think I find myself leaning on the side that enjoys it. When I was younger and after Kingdom Hearts 2 was a game fresh under my belt at the time, the idea of seeing more Organization 13 was appealing to me, but I was always super disappointed when the members from Chain of Memories were killed off so early on. Like, that was always pretty lame. I kind of understand why people might not like this game that much though. I mean, like, it could get pretty boring when you're playing for hours and hours, and it does get repetitive towards later parts of the game. But for me, I was always impressed with how they had a game like this working at all. Like, this feels really close to a console Kingdom Hearts game, but portable. But then again, you know, we do have Birth by Sleep, that was on the PSP, but the DS was a lot weaker than the PSP, so again, the fact that they have something like this at all is impressive to me, and they did it twice. I mean, don't get me wrong, like, this game has a lot of shitty bits to it, and I also think that part of the reason why I can still look back at this game as fondly as I do is because, I mean, again, like, you know, this game is technically impressive, but it could also just be the nostalgia, too. See, back then, you never really knew that if a game that you wanted was going to get localized, you know? Like, a lot of games never left Japan, so when I found out that I could own and play a game I was interested in, I'd get excited for that. This was a thing with the Game Boy Advance as well, having a number of games that stayed in Japan, but I noticed this a lot more during the DS's lifespan. I had access to a lot more information thanks to the internet and magazines that covered these kind of games, and when a game looked really cool but never got localized, that would always frustrate me. Oh, but then the poor multi-billion-dollar companies are going to get upset over me because I'm playing their ROMs. Well, then get out of my face! I am more than willing to pay for things if you provide the things I want to buy. If you don't want me pirating your games, then let me buy them. It's that simple. I already talked about the Chibi Robo DS game that never left Japan, but there was also a Fire Emblem game that never left Japan. Now, we did get Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon. You know, it's really cool how we finally get a version of the first Fire Emblem game, seeing how that's another game that we never got in the West. But this game is kind of, sort of, really boring. Now, you'd think that since this is a remake, that it would take a lot of the improvements from the other games in the series and implement them here, you know, making it the best version of Marth's story, right? Well, from what I understand, they did, but they mostly didn't. Now, this game does reuse the same maps from the Famicom game, but it also adds some new story beats, some new characters, and some tweaked game balancing. But then they went ahead and removed just about every single feature from the previous Fire Emblem games that made them so iconic. So the support system? Gone. Bonus EXP? Gone. So many other features were cut. So when you're playing something like Path of Radiance for the first time, and then you play this, at the time, new game, It feels incredibly bare bones and underwhelming. And with all of that being said, Intelligent Systems also remade Mystery of the Emblem, and right from the start, this is a much different, albeit familiar game. You start off by making your own custom character, you could choose your starting class, and you even have the option of turning off the permadeath feature that the Fire Emblem franchise is known for. Yeah, Awakening got a lot of shit for making Fire Emblem more casual, but this was really the game to do it. The only reason why I don't think people bring that up is because this is the game that never left Japan. Though it does have me curious how this game would have held up, because from what I played, it's actually pretty damn good. Like, they even brought back the support mechanic. And this is why I prefer something like Fire Emblem over Advance Wars. Like, I like how character-driven these games can be. So if you take away the mechanic that adds more to these characters, it takes away a lot more than you'd think. While on the topic of Nintendo games that never left Japan, you guys remember Tomodachi Collection on the 3DS, right? That game where you take your Miis and you put them on an island to see how they interact with each other? Did you guys know that idea originally started on the DS? Tomodachi Collection is pretty much the same game, but a bit more limited as you'd expect. You know, it's weird to think about how the DS never really used the Miis all that much, seeing how the Wii was such a huge success at the time. So, you know, you'd think that we'd get more games with the Miis in them, but that's not really the case. I mean, really, this was it, and it never even left Japan. I've always loved these kind of games. Like, I played a lot of Tomodachi Life back when it was on the 3DS, so to see another admittedly dated version was nice. I mean, there really isn't a reason to play this over the 3DS version, but my curiosity was satisfied to say the least. Hey, did you guys know that I'm really bad at transitioning? Because Mega Man Battle Network was the thing at one point. Now, in all seriousness, Mega Man had it really good on the DS with the likes of the Zero Collection, the ZX games, and the Star Force games. But did you guys know that Capcom actually remade the first Battle Network game that added elements of Star Force's story? Yeah, me neither. But then again, I've never been a Mega Man guy, so I don't even know what a Star Force is. Like, apparently it's connected to Battle Network or something. I don't know. Like, Mega Man has never really been my area of expertise. I just thought it was cool. Also, did you guys know that they made a fully fledged game in the Tales series? Tales of Innocence is the most impressive game I've seen on the DS so far, and I can totally understand why this game never got a localization. This game has a lot of voice acting, a shocking amount of it, honestly. So having to hire Western voice actors and having to retranslate all the dialogue, they probably didn't even have the budget to bring this game over. The battle system is still very much like the previous Tales of games. The overworld is fully 3D. The story from what I played so far is kind of generic, but if I'm honest, the characters are very likable, but then again, that's kind of to be expected from the Tales series. So yeah, consider this a fucking win, dude. Like, this game is so cool, and not a lot of people talk about it. Keep in mind, too, that all of the games that I just mentioned, including countless others that I haven't, were translated by fans. You know, the amount of work that goes into these kind of projects is unreal, and it's thanks to these people that we can experience these games without having to learn a second language. There's still so much more about the DS I want to talk about, but at this point, I think it's pretty obvious as to why the DS was so successful and why so many people love it. The strong first-party support, the consistent third-party support, a comfortable design, revisions that improve battery life and screens, backwards compatibility with the Game Boy Advance. Like, there is so much to love about the DS. Now, there are things about this console that haven't aged very well, like some games did come off as feeling very gimmicky, but the DS delivered by providing a massive library of games for all audiences and genres. Like, there is no question. The Nintendo DS is by far my favorite handheld system ever. Bar none, it's just that good. So, yeah, this was a video that I've been wanting to do for a while, and it feels so good to finally get it out there. I hope it was worth the wait, too. Like, there was still a lot of stuff that I wanted to talk about, but I had to cut some stuff out of the script because, I mean, well, this is already one of the longest videos on my channel so far. So if you feel as if I missed something, you know, feel free to let me know in the comment section. And while you're at it, you should talk about some of your favorite DS games and give me some recommendations. Like, I'm totally open for suggestions. But in any case, that's all the time I have for today. So until next time, I will see you around.